Welcome back to Dragon Ball Dissection. You know, it almost pains me to brag about this because, again, it's not the right line. But just so you know, the day I released my last Dragon Ball Dissection episode, the one about battle powers, well, this happened. I'll just leave that here and let it speak for itself. But in this new world without scouters, our heroes from Earth and Vegeta have finally confronted Frieza, and things are going, better than expected, honestly. But despite all evidence pointing to the contrary, this fight is going to go on for a while. A long while. And like with other lengthy fights, I'll briefly recap it before getting on to the analysis. With Krillin out of commission, Gohan freaks out and fights back against Frieza impressively, but to no avail, and gets tortured for his trouble. However, Krillin returns and lures Frieza away so that Dende can heal Gohan. Apparently, healing is a power that he has, and it's how Krillin came back. Just as they rally again, Piccolo arrives and appears to be something of a match for Frieza, so Frieza transforms again and brings Piccolo to heal. Gohan swoops in once more with his Anger Blast, which accomplishes nothing but spooking Frieza, so he decides to transform into his final form. The fight with the non-Gokus versus the various forms of Frieza is, well, underwhelming. It's not bad per se, but it's just not memorable the way the Saiyan arc fights are. And I think a lot of that has to do with how little seems to be at stake here. Toriyama is smart enough to hold back the idea that Frieza has more transformations than the one we've already seen. Either that or he just happened to make it up right at that moment. Actually, I think he did. In the 30th anniversary Super History book, I hadn't planned on that either. I was like, that's kind of a lot. I should have just had him say 2 times instead. Yes, that is quite a bit. And while cutting out the only briefly seen third form would have helped, it still wouldn't have solved the problem that having a villain with multiple transformations who can engage those transformations at will means that everything before the final form is a waste of time. It's the reason I defended Vegeta's insistence that Frieza go ahead and transform. There's no point to the heroes wasting effort on a weaker form if the villain can just pull out a better form whenever he wants to. I'm not a huge fan of the multiple villain transformations that dominate Dragon Ball from here on out, but at least the other villains who do it have conditions that must be met before they can transform. Frieza, unfortunately, is the worst application of this concept, and it's why this fight ends up feeling less like a terrifying battle to the death, and more like a game of tennis. They just keep hitting the ball back to each other over and over and over again, pulling out more and more ways to one-up each other. See, the Saiyan arc fight with Nappa is good because of the overwhelming odds the characters face. They keep giving their all but are taken out one by one. Any small victory is a rush of excitement, and any time those hopes are dashed is crushing. And it feels like Toriyama tried to recreate that feeling here, but pushed the elements to such an extreme that they just didn't work anymore. Here, everything is, oh, this is going to be the strongest thing ever. No, this is going to be the strongest thing ever. No, this is going to be the strongest thing ever. Nuh-uh, this is the strongest thing ever. No, this is the strongest thing ever. So rather than inducing that feeling of dread, Toriyama just fakes us out repeatedly with all this hype, and eventually, it loses its punch. For example, Tenshinhan giving his all for his final Kikoho and failing evokes feelings of desperation and futility that these examples never can. The Saiyan arc never overplayed its hand. Its few overpowering trump cards were well spaced and strategically used. While they have moves or strategies they think might work, there's never really a moment until Goku arrives that's played up as, oh, this is the ultimate thing that's going to save us all. And Nappa never has some kind of reveal that he's not even using 1/10 of his power or something ridiculous like that. He just always has the upper hand, and the heroes have to figure out some way, any way to turn things to their advantage. Here it's nothing but dueling power-ups, most of which ultimately don't matter. They're like the Mafuba from the Piccolo arc, only half the cast are showing up with Denshi jars. Now, I'll be fair. In serialization, not knowing where this is going, it's pretty exciting. Still not as exciting as what's come before, but it works well enough. It's only when you put everything together and look back at it that it fails to hold up. And, well, Dragon Ball Dissection judges the arcs as complete works. I see no real merit in judging an incomplete story anyway. If it only works in isolation, well, that means it has an unsatisfying resolution. All the tension dissipates the moment you realize that Frieza could easily kill all of them in an instant if he just took this seriously. The first few times, it's a good character trait that he be a little cocky. He has every reason to feel cocky. But even after he transforms into his final form, he's still not giving it anywhere near his all. And after a half a dozen times, it starts to get embarrassing for Frieza and tedious for the audience. The fight against Frieza lasts nearly 8 months in real time, and the majority of it is just screwing around. The fight with Frieza's incomplete forms goes on for over 2 months of serialization. That's not exactly a short amount of time, but not terrible. However, because of the nature of this fight and its back and forth one-upmanship, Piccolo is completely wasted, and that's the real loss in this. He's not a character in this fight. He's presented as simply another power-up among countless other power-ups, one in the middle of this road on the way to a Frieza that actually matters. So by the time we get to that Frieza, Piccolo has already gone from strongest fighter to completely irrelevant again. He gets to smack Frieza around for 1 chapter. Remember that putting him in harm's way after all they've gone through to restore Earth's Dragon Balls is a dubious plan from the outset, and there's no payoff for it. After all that time spent with boring as hell Nail, and the characters having spent 2 Dragon Ball wishes on getting Piccolo to Namek, he gets 1 chapter where he gets to be useful. And he's not even being useful because nothing he does when he fights second form Frieza amounts to anything. You might argue, oh, they needed him to buy time for Goku to heal. I hate arguments like that because Toriyama can take Goku out of that machine whenever he wants to, and it's always going to be in the nick of time. Removing Piccolo is not going to change anything. Piccolo is such a power-up excuse that he and Frieza even one-up each other at one point with nothing but dialogue. Piccolo beats up on second form Frieza. Second form Frieza then says he's not giving it his all and starts beating up on Piccolo. Then Piccolo says he's not taking it seriously either. And then before Piccolo even gets to fight, Frieza declares, "Nuh-uh, I'm taking it even less seriously than you are. I'm transforming again!" Piccolo doesn't even get to come in at an important moment like Goku usually does. You know, those moments when all seems lost and everyone's about to die. Piccolo doesn't come in when Kuririn is stabbed or when Gohan is being tortured. He just comes in at a random moment when everyone else is doing pretty alright. And hey, kudos to Toriyama for not falling back on that tire cliche again, but it makes it all the more obvious that Piccolo really doesn't need to be here. The only other moment Piccolo does anything useful is when he stalls for time so Goku can finish his Genkidama, something that could have and probably should have been done by Gohan and Kuririn because it's their story. When I get right down to it, I don't care that Piccolo is a Namekian. He has no place in this story. This is not about him. He has no connection to any of this aside from the non-character he assimilated who does have a connection. Piccolo's never seen this planet. He's never met its people. He's just a late arrival to the fight who doesn't need to be there because there's just no way for the story to fit him in at this late a point. He's just being wasted. It seems to me that Piccolo is a popular character who, due to the necessity of the story, hadn't gotten much exposure lately. So Toriyama forced him back into the story, despite Piccolo having nothing to do. So Piccolo gets all this build-up, all this time spent getting ready for action, and his role in the story never reaches a climax. It never achieves release. In other words, my Demon King friend, you've just been greenballed. And it's not even going to be the last time. Then there's the fact that, well, Frieza's great, don't get me wrong, and we're going to see him do some awful and amazing things. I'm not denying that for a second. He was just so much cooler before we saw him do anything, though. He's been built up so much as this pants-wettingly strong guy. Gohan and Kuririn can't even be close to him without going into near panic attacks. Kaio forbids Goku to engage him. Even Vegeta, as devastating as he was to everyone in the last arc, has to resort to subterfuge because he can't take on Frieza directly. Frieza's kinda like Yoda or the Emperor from Star Wars. We never needed to see them fight, they were better than that. They were far beyond anything we could imagine. So when we finally did see them fight, it was just the same stuff that everybody else was doing. Frieza worked as this tiny, unassuming guy who was nonetheless absolutely terrifying, and who could just blast things away with his fingertips without even getting up from his hover chair. When he turns into a big hulking brute and starts actually fighting, he's just not as interesting anymore. It's like I said with the battle powers, it all starts to blend together, and he just seems like any other guy who fights. But Dragon Ball is a series that demands a final confrontation like this, so there's just no way around it. And, well, Frieza being built up as this impossibly strong character also requires a resolution. But there just doesn't seem to be any way to really measure up to those expectations. Toriyama just built it up way too high. At around this point, Frieza comes to the realization that Gohan is a Saiyan due to him becoming stronger every time Frieza beats him up. However, he can't figure out how Gohan can exist. He thought the only 3 survivors of planet Vegeta were Vegeta, Nappa, and Raditz. However, he looks kinda like Raditz. Okay. So maybe it's Raditz's kid. Never mind the fact that you and Zarbon were talking about how there is a Saiyan with a son on Earth. Clearly this kid from Earth must be Raditz's kid. Up until now, Vegeta has mostly stayed out of the battle. He's complained a lot, gotten freaked out a lot, and attempted a failed ki blast from behind, but now that Frieza's going into his final form, he decides on a plan. He grabs Kuririn and insists that he deal Vegeta a mortal wound. Oh, now you want him to do that. You didn't seem so keen on it last time. But Vegeta is once again taking a calculated risk. Realizing that Dende's healing power can be exploited, he reasons that if he comes back from a near-death injury one more time, he'll be powerful enough to take on Frieza and, dare he say it, finally become a Super Saiyan. He says it has to be Kuririn because it wouldn't work if he did it to himself. Are you sure about that, Vegeta? Because Goku did it to himself just fine. Or maybe Goku's better at that too, huh? But this is why I'm not at all bothered by the so-called abuse of the near-death power-up in this arc. If anything, it seems like the most plausible way of having the characters, well, the Saiyan characters, make up the massive differences between their power and Frieza's. It is taking advantage of a very specific set of circumstances that other Saiyans would not have had access to. It explains how people like Goku, Vegeta, and Gohan can get so much stronger in such a short amount of time than any other Saiyan could. I always hear people complain, well, Saiyans would have been in battle all the time, they're constantly getting destroyed. Why wouldn't they be making the same massive power gains? Well, the way I see it, despite Frieza's forces having a lot of advanced technology, the best they can do healing-wise is a giant non-portable machine. If a Saiyan fights on another planet and gets a mortal wound, he ain't living long enough to get to a medical machine. And it's the mortal wounds that grant the biggest gains. And we don't even know if medical machines are capable of healing wounds as critical as torso-sized holes through a person. The fighters from Earth and Namek introduce a new wildcard into this scenario, the ability to instantly heal in the field. Through Senzu and Dende's healing capabilities, suddenly there's a much greater possibility of surviving mortal wounds multiple times and reaping the benefits of that. So it doesn't seem at all implausible to me that the Saiyan characters can grow exponentially because of something like that. It would seem even less implausible if that 1 million battle power figure hadn't been thrown out there. And I of course hate the fact that these gains that only the Saiyans can make put everyone else out of their league from here on out. But I have to give credit to Toriyama for really making this idea work. Oh yeah, so Dende can heal people. That just kinda came out of nowhere, right? Vegeta asks Kuririn why they were keeping it a secret, and Kuririn replies if they'd known about it, they would have had him heal Goku. I don't know why Toriyama felt the need to bring up that issue, because now that he has, I can't help but wonder, well, now that you do know, why aren't you sending him to heal Goku? There's not that much distance between you and Frieza's ship, certainly not enough that it wouldn't be preferable or feasible to do so. So, thanks for calling attention to a problem we probably wouldn't have noticed otherwise. Speaking of Dende, it's a shame Vegeta didn't go over his plan with everyone because Dende knows Vegeta is an immoral wretch who murdered an entire village of Namekians just cuz, so he refuses to heal Vegeta. Ultimately, the others are able to convince Dende to heal Vegeta by admitting that they are completely outclassed, and Vegeta is now their 23rd only hope to winning this battle. However, Dende healing Piccolo alerts Frieza to the fact that Dende has healing powers, so the first thing he does upon achieving his final form is to kill Dende, which is the first smart thing Frieza's done this entire fight. So we've made it to Frieza's true form, and for lack of a better term, it is a return to form for him. The second and third forms are just so not Frieza. They're alien, but not Frieza. This one is small and sleek. He even talks in a somewhat childlike way. He's simple in design, but almost beautiful. Oh, and completely naked. Why not? But while everyone else is unable to lay a hand on this new Frieza, the newly powered-up Vegeta can still see his movements, and finally steps up to confront Frieza. His entire arc has been the journey to this moment. He may have lost the Dragon Balls, but he's now ready to confront his destiny. And he will. Next time!